welcome on board to Priva-Sea. This series is your compass in the vast ocean of data privacy, guiding you through the currents and undercurrents of today's data privacy landscape. I'm your host Steve, your captain for this voyage. In today's session, titled Through the Binoculars, a close-up on the current state of modern data privacy, we're diving into the waters of our current data privacy world. We'll explore the evolution, the present challenges, and what the horizons hold for the privacy of our personal data in this interconnected world. So, we have Rob here, who is our guest panelist for today. Rob, could you introduce yourself a bit?
Thanks, Steve. I've been a risk and compliance professional for around 22 years, and I've been focusing on data privacy, data governance, and data security for the last 7 years. And it's an area that not only came as an area of interest to me, but I think crucially, it's really emerged as one of the key risk areas that every single business faces today. If you deal with customers, if you don't deal with customers, but you support businesses that do, data privacy is absolutely critical. Data security is absolutely critical. And as we move into the information era and we see artificial intelligence emerging, data governance is also really critical too.
Yeah, great. I think you have a lot of vast experience around it. Before we dive into the questions, let's get to know what data privacy is. So, what is data privacy, Rob?
Data privacy, I think a key development in the concept of privacy has been the addition of this word data to privacy. If we think back to the days of buying magazines and newsagents, right, privacy was all something that was being invaded for the royal family by these photographers that had long telephoto lenses and so forth. And that probably still happens, right? We all have a sense of privacy and what's our personal life that we don't like or want other people to have access to or know about. In the days before social media, I know that some people might not remember those days, but I certainly do, right? The only personal information a lot of the times that was really out there in the open might have been your surname, your initials, your address, and your telephone number in the white pages or something like that. There wasn't, this proliferation of what we see today in terms of information about us, who we are, where we've been, and what we're doing. Today's landscape is, as I say, it's totally different, right? And social media in one sense has sucker punched us, and it's behaviorally programmed us to open up our personal data floodgates under a concept of engagement. Now, at first, we probably noticed some intrusive marketing calls and then maybe some SMS messages that we didn't want and wanted to unsubscribe to. But now I think we all start to understand that personal data and data privacy, right, is so important these days because blindly shared data drives outcomes all around us. From a legal perspective, Australia's had privacy legislation at a national level since 1988. It's got laws at state level. The law was very much in development until 10 years ago. I mean, the Australian privacy principles that we have today were only really entered into that act in 2014. Okay, so since 2014, there's been more recent laws around the world, like the European General Data Protection Regulation. That law is starting to become quite pervasive. It's simply a later generation of privacy law, but it is more utilizable today in the digital world than perhaps what our act is.
Right. So let's head on to the next question. So what are the things that shaped our current understanding of data privacy?
I think the great driver of social awareness, when I look at current understanding, I really want to talk about today because it changes really quickly these days, right? So I think the great driver of social awareness today is the increasing prevalence of what we think of as data breaches or data misuse, and the evolution of cybercrime to cyber conflict or even warfare. Now, that might sound a bit serious and a bit full on, but when we look at some of the data breaches that occurred last year that impacted millions of Australians, our Australian government says that those hacking events or malicious activity events were caused by another country and agents of another country. So we are in this era where it is no longer a smash and grab by some nasty cyber criminals who might be down your road, down my road, or somewhere here in Australia. It is a bigger geopolitical issue today. The idea that someone has our data and might do the wrong thing with it only really hits home when that person might clean out our bank account or lock our data with ransomware. And now that can be done in these sort of national, almost stratospheres, right, it's starting to scare us. And I refer not only to the sort of consumer companies like Optus and Medibank and Latitude Financial, and many people might have encountered these as customers, right? But there have been law firms. HWL Ebsworth have had one of the biggest data breaches, in Australian history and significance for the nature of information that's in there. DP World, a cargo port, was shut down, while their systems had to be basically rebuilt. Malicious activity around data occurs in different ways today, and it achieves different effects. I think Australians are waking up to this, though. For a business perspective, I would have to say that the main drivers today that inform our understanding of data privacy and both the opportunities and the risks that it presents are exponential growth in general purpose technologies in the last 15 years. So, for example, computer processing power, manufacturing methodologies such as 3D printing, power generation and battery technologies, containerization in global trade and logistics. That might sound a bit weird, but that's actually really, really important for moving the products that are built by all of these different, technological advancements around the world. Personal data has also been a fundamental enabler for commoditized applications of all of these technologies. And at the end of the day, it's how some corporations out there, superstar corporations, are making a great deal of money. And that is driving our economy in many ways, the global economy in many ways, particularly in the Western world. I've got to acknowledge Azim Azar's excellent book, Exponential, that deals with these topics in a brilliant way, published in 2020. It really supports or backs my thinking here. It's how I sort of got on to thinking about these things, and I really recommend it.
Thanks for answering that question. So the third question is, what are the most pressing data privacy issues facing the people and businesses today?
I think when we think about individuals, there is a heightened interest in better controlling our personal information when we deal with the organisations that we deal with. That might mean locking your Facebook account. It might mean requesting an organisation delete your personal information. Now, in Australia, organisations are not yet obliged to delete personal information when you request it. In many prominent industries, such as banking, financial services, and telecommunications, there are laws which actually require organisations to retain your personal information for a certain period of time, and that might be much longer even than the time that you were a customer of them when you were using their products and services. These laws serve different purposes. Anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing is probably a prominent one that I think about, but the Telecommunications Act also requires this sort of data to be retained. Now, Australia is a little bit different, as I've mentioned before, to countries in Europe who have a fresher set of privacy law, and they do have specific rights relating to deletion of personal information. Management of privacy from a corporate perspective or an organizational perspective, we look at the idea of data minimization. We only want to collect the information that we actually have use for. We don't want to collect information speculatively or on the off chance that we might find a use for it in the future. For businesses also, I think data governance, right? So paradoxically, data governance is likely to deliver greater opportunities for automatic processing of data and our data, personal data, both for use or utilization and also sometimes misutilization, misuse, right? They've got to govern that. They've got to watch that, monitor that, make sure it's not happening. But also data governance gives greater control of data for the businesses and their relationship with the individuals. By more clearly understanding the person who is dealing with you through data and making sure that you're able to identify that customer even when they've used a different email address, they had a different home address, different mobile number, a different name, then they got married, maybe they ceased to be married, all of these factors of life that sometimes mean that we appear in a database 10 or 20 times. That's what data governance is all about. It's all about making it more efficient for businesses to understand who their customers are. For small businesses in Australia, I think the challenge might become very real in 2024 because historically they've been exempt from the Privacy Act, and forthcoming changes that we expect this year may significantly change that situation, and small businesses might find that significant effort is demanded, and they might really need to think about how they manage personal information of their stakeholders.
So, how are emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, IoT, etc., affecting data privacy?
In one word, I think if I have to put it in one word, it's scale. So the scale of data sets and connections between data points continues to expand at unimaginable rates. Can you even comprehend how many data sets your email address of the last 10 years, or even in my case, I think I've had one for almost 20 years, how many data sets has that email address been through? How many data sets has my IP address been through for my laptop computer here, my home connection, or for my mobile phone? The exponential era that we've entered is changing the way we live, the way we work, the way we play, the way we earn our living. While AI has been around for decades, aircraft were able to land themselves using basic artificial intelligence in the 1960s. The sub-symbolic AI or the deep learning models that we see today are just emerging in a relative stage of infancy for consumers and for the high street businesses that we have out there. They've probably been used in more advanced applications and industry applications for some time. But for us, the commoditized ability to go on and get Google's Gemini or ChatGPT or DALL-E, these things are just emerging for us. And it's great fun to play with, but we don't quite know how to use them. We don't quite know how they work yet.
Great. I think with that power shift in place right now with AI, it's a significant focus of area that should be interested by people, by businesses, and for governments ultimately to put in place of these restrictions and legal compliance in terms of how it should be used, how the data should be used and retained, because AI is very new in terms of how it's being used, how it's being created, and how it's being trained on. I think it's where it needs the most interest and it's the most study into it ever more than other technologies right now we have. Right. So how have recent laws and regulations impacted the approach to data privacy worldwide?
Laws such as the European Union's GDPR, which we talked about a little previously, have highlighted the harms and risks associated with personal data misuse in the information age that we live in today. And those laws are very influential around the world because the European Union have used them in such a way to guide or steer how European data may be transferred out of the European Union, and how organizations or businesses, for example, that are outside of the EU, maybe they're from America, maybe they're from Australia, but how they deal with European individuals' data, or they call them data subjects, how all the international global businesses that might deal with the European Union's citizens, they have regulated that space. And is it 100% effective? Is it a silver bullet? No, it's not, and no law ever will be, and particularly in an area that's changing as quickly as this one is. Similarly, though, I think in the last few years we've seen competition law, which has existed for decades, and many of the times it's laws that have been on the books for decades. But competition law has increasingly become an avenue to address issues associated with data platforms and markets they create. Now, markets for data platforms often rely on personal information and personal data. And so data privacy is now actually being almost regulated by our competition regulators as much as it is by our privacy regulators. Their interest is certainly growing. For Australian businesses, privacy has long lived in compliance departments, but this has to change as products and services increasingly are data products or data services, or are at least enabled and undertaken with critical data elements, even just to make a business record of the service having taken place, for example. Data privacy needs to emerge from the compliance department. Just like data governance, data privacy is actually owned by everyone in the business, whether it's the accounts team or the product team, and whether they like it or not. The world has changed, and they do need to understand the key concepts of data privacy as a cornerstone of their work, perhaps not in its A to Z entirety, but they do need to understand those parts of privacy that impact the data that they do work with, and they need to understand them as a part of their core skill set. It's no longer something that you just have to pick up the phone and ask compliance for. If I had $1 for every time that I had been asked what is personal information in my career, from people who actually handle personal information constantly every day, I would own more than one property, the one property that I have a mortgage on. So in 2025, if anyone asks me that question, I think I'm going to give them 10 minutes in the naughty corner, because, we all have to understand this, and it's as easy as Googling it. So, to understand what is personal information, when do I have to take care of it? There's heaps of information out there, and, it's something that our regulators really do try to push out in terms of awareness. So, yeah.
Great. So we just focused on the foundational level of laws and regulations in terms of that are impacted by the approach to data privacy in terms of worldwide. Then, leading on to that question, are current regulations keeping pace with the technological advancements and vice versa?
Technological advancements, of course, have been so agile, and we are seeing this exponential growth. As I've mentioned before, law, unfortunately, has been less agile. Interestingly enough, laws are probably produced today at a greater rate than what they used to be. That's because they're leveraging the good technology too, right? And so they're getting more efficient. But it's the subject matter that has become so much more broad and intricate at the same time. And that's been one of the real challenges for regulating the area of data and data privacy and data governance, is that you have to almost legislate from a very principled position, and that's not always easy to do in law. If what you're writing laws about existed this year but has been shut down the next year because it's been superseded by a new version, and it's really quite different because the technology changed, the laws that you just spent all that time writing have gone to waste. And so that's a constant game that the regulators have had to be trying to keep ahead of, but it's really very, very difficult. Regulation also faces jurisdictional and scope challenges. If I just look at Australia, why should a South Australian have a different privacy regime for their public sector health information in a hospital compared to a Queenslander? Doesn't make any sense to me, right? Well, it does make legal sense based on the history of our country, but we need to think, is that still how we want it today? And we need to challenge ourselves to find ways to unify and start acting as a nation in terms of data. Should we have 3 Commonwealth regulators? We have the Australian Communications Media Authority, we have the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, and we have the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, the ACCC, and maybe even ASIC, the corporate regulator, all concerned with the use of personal data in an area like marketing, right? So that's 4 regulators, and they all want to have something to say about using personal data in marketing. You know, we've got to think about how we make this more efficient. It's not without precedent. I mean, if we look at aviation legislation, when the aviation industry was born at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, it was only really in 1929 that nations started to write treaties about aviation and flying from one country to another. And it really wasn't until after the Second World War that we got the framework that we use today to regulate commercial aviation around the world. It took until after the Second World War. So, you know, it's regulation that includes examples of public law, treaties and international conventions, and private international law. And I suggest this framework that aviation uses is somewhat informative of the kind of mechanisms that we need to govern technology at a pace that approaches technology's own pace.
Right. So we do have all these benefits and pros in terms of data privacy. But what are the biggest challenges ensuring that data privacy is respected?
I think it starts with us. It starts with the individuals, you know. We have to realize that we have collectively contributed to the amount of personal data that is out there in the world today. We are the ones who created the Facebook accounts, the Instagram accounts, the TikToks, the blah, 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 list goes on, right? However, organizations such as Facebook or Meta, such as Google, such as TikTok, they need to recognize that this contribution by us was kind of made under a form of duress. And that duress was the products and the services that we increasingly consume in a digital manner, right? In order for us to partake in those, we had to hand over some personal information. And yes, at times they were making it fun, making it seem like a game or something cool for the family. But now do we really want them to have all of those photos of our kids? You know, so the genie is out of the bottle. I mean, that data is out there now. So who's winning? Well, it really is the superstar corporations, as Azim Azhar puts it in Exponential. You know, there's the big 9 sort of companies: Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Tencent, Alibaba, Baidu, Facebook, IBM. We could probably add a 10th one to that, NVIDIA, right now, right? So, you know, they're the winners. We can see that. It's easy to see that. Just look at the stock market graphs. You know, that's what will tell you, okay, yeah, they're winning. But how do we start winning back? Regulation does need to step up its game. It needs to evolve in a more responsive way to enable government legislation to occur, but it also needs to encourage private international law to develop. So that is, the big stakeholders who are making money out of this need to be encouraged to start regulating themselves, just in the same way, as I mentioned with the aviation sector, that airlines and the aircraft manufacturers and the airports and the service baggage handling service providers, they all participate in private international law agreements that can change when their technology changes much more easily than a government having to change their regulation. And the international aviation sector works quite well. Similarly enough, international shipping does have, similar private international law as well. At the high street level, when we think about our day-to-day lives, everyday lives, I think consent management and data governance are my two big themes. They are cornerstones to managing personal data responsibly, transparently, and with accountability, but both are actually very tricky, especially for legacy organisations, which have significant handicaps compared to a startup organisation in the modern world. But I think that, consent management and data governance, those would be the biggest challenges, I think, right now for corporations in Australia.
Great. So there's these biggest challenges in terms of ensuring data privacy is respected. But a lot of the byproducts of data privacy violation is data breach, the breaches of data.
Yeah.
Then how should people respond to such data breach?
Well, I would say that prevention is far better than response. And so let's look at prevention for a moment. For individuals, it all means preparing by taking time to read information that's available from service providers or product providers, especially your bank, especially your financial product providers or your health providers. That's obviously very sensitive data. Look at the information that they provide relating to information security when you're using their apps, for example. Use multi-factor identification wherever you can. So you're logging in on your computer and it's going to send a message to your mobile phone so that you can click on that and say, yes, that's me logging in via my computer right now. Very, very important way to ensure that identity management has integrity. Change your passwords regularly. I mean, it sounds in one sense easy, but we all know it's hard. We all have to remember all these passwords these days, right? Spend some time coming up with a system that works for you. Some people use or choose to use the password managers. I personally don't use password managers. There have been cases of password managers having data breaches themselves, and I do sort of feel that they become a little bit of the ultimate honeypot target for a hacker. I think maybe if individuals can come up with a series of passwords, which only they're going to recognize, it could be via numbers that are important to you. And as soon as you see that number, you know what it means. And you're able to restate a phrase or something like that. One password I once used was how many times I did a particular ski run on a skiing holiday that was a fantastic holiday. But no one, not even the people I was there on the holiday with, are going to know how many times I did that particular ski run with. But that's where my password came from. But I'll always remember. So I think I might be conservative. I am the kind of guy who now hangs up on cold callers or marketing calls. I just hang up on them because it's too hard to tell whether they're legitimate or not. And I feel awful doing it if it's a legitimate person, but you can't tell these days just over the phone. So, I prefer to hang up, and I think that that's probably the other thing is when you look at your email lists, email is, there's too much email in the world these days, but there's certainly too much spam and there's certainly too much phishing. So that's the other thing I would say, be really careful with your emails. If you don't know that sender and if you didn't expect that email, do not go clicking on links or opening attachments. Those are the real nasties that can cause problems. If you are notified of a breach, though, if it has happened, I think change all your passwords. I think that that's the first step you can take to regaining control. It is a pain, but as I say, changing them regularly is good practice anyway. And it is just one of the costs of modern day life. We used to have to stand in queues down at the bank. Now the bank doesn't have a branch and we have to do it on our phones. Changing passwords is like standing in the queue. If you spot unusual activity on a digital account that you own, act fast. Contact your bank, contact your service provider as soon as possible with your concerns and explain what you're seeing or what's happening. Their ability to respond is often related to time. So make regular checks of your services as well. Go through your bank account, make sure you know where those charges came from. It's good practice. For businesses, it's take all threats seriously. Prepare data breach response plans. They might kind of go out the window somewhat in any given breach situation. However, at least if you have up-to-date contact lists and up-to-date checklists of the considerations that are important to your business, that will help you navigate the aftermath of a data breach. The other thing that is really important is knowing who to contact to expand your response capability and the scale of your response if a breach is of a larger magnitude than what might be a day-to-day volume that you can deal with. Once a lot of data is breached and has now been accessed or misused or something like that, right? You've got a big problem on your hands and you're going to need to scale up fast. And that's one of the really big challenges. Even big corporates that I've worked for, banks, insurers, they can struggle with that. There is only a limited supply of the right kind of people to help out as well. So it's really important for businesses to be on top and do some prior preparation.
Great. I think for individuals, you mentioned a lot of good practices, a lot of good things to do in terms of responding to it. So for businesses, the OAIC has this scheme called Data Breach Notification Scheme. It's where the businesses should immediately notify the OAIC of the data breach it happened. But I do think there's a lot of enhancement should be done to it. There's a lot more to do in terms of this. All right, looking ahead, what are the anticipated challenges in data privacy?
Keeping the horizon current, I think the biggest challenge for businesses and organisations which manage personal information will be the forthcoming privacy law reform changes to the Commonwealth Privacy Act. These changes have been a long time coming, over 4 years coming, and they are likely to be significant for all levels of business. Parts of industry and parts of the commercial high street that have not previously been exposed to the Privacy Act are likely to be subject to the forthcoming privacy laws in some way. So small businesses, human resources functions, they're the key examples. If you provide services, though, to an organisation that are already subject to privacy laws, you may find significant changes will affect you and face new obligations independently of the businesses that you support. So it's important, if you're a supplier to a large corporation, for you to understand that if you're dealing with any of their personal information, the Privacy Act might be about to reach you where it previously didn't. Preparing for these changes is going to take time and resource out of your business to some degree, and that is always hard for small business. So it's actually now is the time to give consideration to what changes might affect your business and how are you going to be able to respond strategically and efficiently in the time frame that's required by the time the laws actually go live and become effective.
So yeah, we've just looked at the anticipated challenges in terms of data privacy. Then, what are the trends or innovations that could shape the future of privacy?
I'm going to stick to my background as a lawyer for this question, I think. I believe that, and I've kind of referenced this a few times already, private international law has a lot to offer the regulation of data privacy and data governance. And so what do I mean by private international law? What private international law is when non-government organizations get together and they transparently come up with a set of rules that are going to govern a particular area or help them to govern a particular area. Good examples of this are international standards, where industries come together to figure out what is a safe practice standard for building a tall building or manufacturing certain kinds of metal components for a car or something like that. We are seeing the development of new international standards, ISO standards, for AI. And I think this will be vitally important to achieve global recognition of responsible AI development and management. We need to see big data platforms and those superstar companies make meaningful commitments in this space, really meaningful commitments. That is a commitment of funding and making sure that independent right? So not pushing their barrow through and pushing their interests through everyone else's agendas, but making sure that they are backing independent standards and regulations that are appropriate and fit for purpose for the world that, yes, they're contributing to. We accept that, but not all in their own sole interest. Recognizing that what they do has an impact on society and the lives people are leading. Big tech, in summary, needs to start earning its social license. The future of AI is in our hands right now, and everybody needs to consider how AI might impact their lives in either a useful way or in a way that might not be appropriate or that they might not want. If you're a professional and no one is talking about AI in your professional networks, start the conversation. Even if it is just asking the basic questions and learning more about how AI might be used in your area or your field of interest, that's a great start. Because if you don't ask, it will just keep on going at its own rate and at its own trajectory, and it will pass you by. So it's really important to be engaged with this stuff as professionals or even just being in small business or in local government, for example. These questions are just as relevant.
Great. Thank you, Rob, for coming in today.
Pleasure. It's great to be with you, Steve, and good luck with the podcast.
Thank you for joining our Priva-Sea talk today. For upcoming talks, webinars, and insights on data privacy, as well as updates on our projects, please follow our DFLab page. Thank you.